So we are in list item delete action component. Now to delete an item, we should wrap this view with a touchable component so we can handle the onPress event. So here I'm going to use touchable without feedback because both touchable opacity and touchable highlight look kind of weird in this context when we swipe an item to left and see the red box. So let's move the view inside our touchable component. Now here we handle the onPress event. Now what should be right here? Well, just like before, we want to keep this component reusable. So we don't want to implement the logic for deleting a message here because tomorrow we may use this component somewhere else, let's say in the list of notes. So when we try to delete a note, we don't want to delete a message. So where we use this component, that's where we should decide how to delete an item, not here. So I'm going to give this component a new prop called onPress. So this is a function that we pass from the outside. And here we simply delegate to that function. As simple as that. We're done with this component, so let's save the changes. Now we go to the messages screen. So this is where we're using our list item delete action, but there's a problem here. With this syntax, we cannot set the onPress prop. To solve this, we have to pass a function here and render the list item delete action. So now we have a component so we can set its props. I'm going to put this on a new line. Now let's set onPress to a function. For now, let's just log the message on the console. So here we pass an arrow function and log the item. So this is the item that we tap on. It's currently in the scope, so we can access it and log it on the console. Let's test our implementation up to this point. So save. Now tap. So here's the message we want to delete. Beautiful. Now, deleting a message is more than a line of code. So I don't want to implement that logic here. I want to implement it in a separate function. So in this function component, we're going to define another function called handle delete. This function takes a message. Now in this function, we should do two things. First, we should delete the message from the messages array. And then we need to call the server to delete the message from the backend as well. Now we're going to talk about the second step in the future when we talk about connecting our app to the backend. So for now, we just want to delete this message from our messages array. But there's a problem. If we remove an object from this array, our function component is not going to get re-rendered. For this to happen, we need to have state in our component. That's just basic React. So whenever we update the state, our components, whether they are function or class components, get re-rendered. So back to our function component, here we need to declare a state variable. But how can we do that? Aren't function components stateless? Well, they used to be, not anymore. So with the addition of hooks in React, now function components have all the capabilities that we have in class components. So to declare a state variable here, we're going to use a hook. A hook is just a function that allows us to hook into React features in function components. So here we're going to use the state hook to declare a state variable in this function component. So on the top, we're going to import a function called useState. So whenever you see a function whose name starts with use, that is a hook. It's just a JavaScript function. There's no magic about it. But these functions, these hooks, are only available in function components. We cannot use them in class components. Let's see how we can use this hook. It's very easy. So let's say we want to declare a state variable called count. We call useState. We can give our count an initial value. Now this returns an array. So we store it over here. Now the first element in this array is our state variable. So we can call that count. And the second element is a function for updating the state variable. By convention, we call it setCount. So this function is similar to the setState function that we have in class components, okay? Now we can combine these three lines into a single line using array destructure syntax. So we can destructure this array right away and pick the first and second elements, okay? Now in this component, we don't need a count variable. We need an array of messages. So let's go to the top and rename this array to initial messages so we don't have name conflicts. Now, instead of 0, I'm going to use initial messages here. as the initial object for our array of messages. Now let's rename these elements to messages and set messages. So now that we have state in this function, we can go to our handle delete function and remove this message, remove this object from our array of messages. How do we do that? Using the filter method. So we call messages.filter. We want to get all messages except this message object. This is just basic React. So here we pass an arrow function, m goes to m.id does not equal to message.id. This returns a new array, so we can store it over here. And then we call set messages and give it this new array. So we're updating state, and this will cause a re-render, okay? Now we can combine these two lines into a single line. So let's move this expression over here. That's better. Now the final part, we need to use this function. So over here, instead of console.log, we should call handle delete. Let's test our implementation. So save the changes and let's delete this message. It's gone, beautiful. Let's delete this as well. Perfect. Next, we're going to implement pull to refresh.